Manchester United, they're through to the quarterfinals of the Champions League. In the most extraordinary of ways, we thought the ball had gone out for a corner.
Yeah.
Consulted VAR. The referee and VAR had a little chat about it, and the decision was eventually made after the referee consulted the screen that that was handball and that Manchester United would have a penalty, which, as we now know, Marcus Rashford scored and sent Manchester United into the quarterfinals of the Champions League. Yeah. Amidst all the celebration and all the euphoria, did it change your mind about VAR? Are you now massively pro it?
Just for last night. That's
Only
it.
in that one occasion.
Just that one occasion, because obviously it worked in United's favour. And I was, watching the game, and I'm thinking to myself, it's a corner. Is De Gea going to come up? The last few minutes, all of a sudden you see there's been a call for VAR. The referee goes over not once but twice to have a look at it, and then gave a penalty. I was amazed, I must admit. I was really surprised that the penalty was given. Marcus Rashford scored his first penalty for United, which is great, but yeah, from United Sports perspective, VAR was wonderful yesterday, but I don't agree with it at all. I think there's so much that needs to be changed in terms of the rules within the game before you even think about bringing VAR in.
So is it about what VAR is brought in to work with? Is it the decisions that VAR is used for, or is it about using technology itself that you have?
No, I don't have a problem with using technology, but if you're going to use technology, it can be subjective. I think that's the big issue here. It's been mentioned so many times. Oh, well, it's worked in this sport and that sport. Well, most of the sports that's been used in the rules are black and white. There's no real grey areas. Football is so subjective that at the moment I look at it, I think to myself, you can use VAR for mistaken identity, something that's gone on that the referee's not seen. But the rest of it, even with offside, you'd be looking at certain situations where you're thinking to yourself, well, what's going on here? We look at the Harry Kane one last week where we got the penalty, and if that's brought in, if VAR's brought in, then what's the decision? Because a lot of people were saying that it was the right decision to actually give a penalty because he wasn't interfering. Well, if he's not interfering, then I have no idea when he is interfering. So rules need to be simplified. Else, otherwise, it's just going to. It's brought in to solve problems. It's going to create bigger problems.
It's the lack of clarity. Yeah. And I think how long we've spent the last 3 hours trying to understand the interpretations of the law. And that's
the issue is that they're different depending what competition you're playing in.
Well, that's even more bonkers. To think that you're playing in European competition, and last night it's made very clear that if there is movement of the hand towards the ball, then that could be considered a penalty, and that UEFA officials are geared up to give that decision. The problem you have with that is that going to be the same case if it was done in the domestic league, not just the Premier League?
Well, the laws, as they're written, are relatively clear. It's that they're looking for movement of the hand towards the ball, as you said, not the ball towards the hand. They'll look at the distance between the opponent and the ball, and then they'll look at the position of the hand. So that doesn't necessarily mean that there is offence. Where the particular interpretation that we saw in the Manchester United PSG game is concerned, or PSG Man United game, is that UEFA have briefed the referees, or the European body of referees have briefed their referees to interpret that in a different way from how it would be interpreted in the Premier League.
Where are we going? I mean, not one single person watching that moment thought this is going to be a penalty.
Well, they're not sitting in on the briefings, are they? And the media are taken in to be given briefings, and then what happens on the pitch isn't necessarily what they've been briefed about.
But even that decision in itself, a corner was awarded instantly. So little did I know until today, if Manchester United had taken that corner, there was no VAR to consider. Yeah. So the question, you have within all of this is, well, if we're using VAR for really significant moments in the game, yet you can restart it and it wipes it out, well, we have to rethink that in itself, because I think that causes controversy. But the reality is, I think we're going to have to go through some horrendous moments like last night, like the PSG game, perhaps the Harry Kane incident, until we reach a point of simplicity. The problem you have with that, if you just say, well, look, all handballs will be a penalty. As we talked about, well, what happens if players then start chipping the balls up, lifting them up onto people's
and then the referee is
hands.
required to replay players' minds again as to whether or not they've done it deliberately.
It is a grey area. It is, unfortunately, one that is subjected to an individual's interpretation of the laws.
I don't like the word deliberate. I don't, because the only person that knows whether it's deliberate more often than not, unless it's a blatant one, is the player that's actually handling the ball. He's the only one that knows whether it's deliberate. I think that when you talk about making a movement towards the ball, you know, obviously we'll see a couple of examples, but there's a couple of times a player's actually maybe just going to protect his mid-drift or something like that because he knows where the ball's heading towards. Now, that for me is a situation where it's very difficult to give a penalty. Now, the one way of probably making the rule a little bit easier is to say, but this will have problems as well, is to say, OK, well, if the only part of your body that hits that the ball hits on its way to goal is your hand, there's nothing else behind it, then you can say, right, that's handball. But like Emma's just said, the problem that you then have is that, well, what if people start trying to just kick the ball at your hands that's out of the thing? So all of a sudden now, we're actually bringing into a conversation that a player's going to go into an area instead of going for goal and trying to find his teammate. That's the problem.
And it's not even just the consistency of the interpretation. You see from decision, week in, week out, if you apply the interpretation of the law, it should be a penalty.
Have we lost sight of what these more complicated laws of the game have been brought in to do? When we look at the interpretation now of handball, when we look at the various interpretations of offside, when we look at why, for example, VAR has been brought into the game, are we losing sight of the bigger picture?
Well, I think we've created an industry that's making a very good living.
Part of it.
On top of that, we have to be accomplished lawyers to do our profession. I mean, you've got to feel for the players. You know, they constantly have to think about how to put their hands in unnatural positions.
And the problem that you have as well...
Sorry.
Come on. Are you OK? So I think the biggest problem that we have is that if you get all these qualified referees and you put them in a room and you show them instances, you show them video clips that say, right, OK, this is a situation where handball, are you going to give it or are you not going to give it? There's going to be a number of referees that are going to say, well, that's handball. There's going to be referees that are going to say, it's not handball, and that's the problem. Too many rules within the game are open to interpretation, are subjective. Any rule that is subjective, forget VAR.
Well, let's take last night's decision, Manchester United. If that offence happened outside of the box, would they have called for VAR? No. Well, arguably...
they're looking at penalty decisions in particular.
But hang on a minute, that shot was going miles over the bar.
But if Manchester United had scored and there'd been an incident in the build-up to it that was outside the box, then that is something that they could have looked at and gone back to.
We have, I think...
Through the looking glass.
Yeah, I think everybody has a similar opinion. When there is a demand or a drive towards better technology to support grey area matters. We've gone into uncharted territory where we have convoluted it to a point where nobody understands it.
We're trying to. We're doing our best.
We'll
trying
be
to
here
get
all night.
But what's particularly difficult from a manager's point of view when you've got a team who are playing in European competition and domestic competition is that you're dealing with referees who've been briefed in two different ways.
That's something I've absolutely have experienced as a manager. There's no doubt that you have to prepare differently for a European competition than you do a domestic one, and the interpretations of the laws of the game are completely subjective in that mindset. So certain yellow card decisions in Europe are absolutely not yellow card decisions in domestic leagues, and I think that's difficult for players to be jumping back and forth like that and being prepared for different decision-making, regardless, depending on where the nationalities of the officials are from.
Because it comes down to those split seconds that you're asked to make the decisions in.
It does, and I think the fact is when you play in the European competitions, like, for example, myself, when I went on loan as a younger player, when I played in the Europa League, one of the problems that you actually find is that if someone says to you, OK, for this game, you've just got to change your ways. When you go out on that pitch, you know, you get to a certain point in your career and you're going to sort of autopilot. So you're not going to be thinking to yourself, oh, right, OK, we're playing in Europe today, so I've got to do this, I've got this, because all of a sudden that's going to have a huge impact on your performance as an individual and as a team, because instead of thinking about the game, you're thinking about what you can and can't do. And that is a major problem within itself. And from a manager's perspective, how do you go about dealing with that? Because you can probably overcomplicate things for the players and forget about the game.
You have to think about, do I even tell them about this
decision
or this official and the things that we have to be prepared for or not? Do I put it into our consciousness, or do I leave it well alone? And the challenge you have is when all of a sudden you get an early yellow card and the players are like, what have I got a yellow card for that for? I mean, it means there's no consistency. And I think that was absolutely prevalent last night. Like I said, not one person watching their television screen last night thought that the official was going to call for a penalty, and I think all of us were equally shocked.
So VAR is going to be introduced. That's not negotiable. For it to work properly, are we asking for simplification and clarity on what the laws of the game what we actually want to get out of them?
I think so. And I think whether we like it or not, it's going to have to go through trial and error. And I think we're going to have teething problems until a point where we simplify it as such, or we don't, and then it's ditched. And I think that we have to give it a period of time. Whether we like it or not, it's here. I think it's here to stay. And I think we're just going to have to wait for a little bit longer before we perfect it.
In the meantime, do we want to apply it then to situations that are more cut and dry, that aren't... I mean, look, the referee in that situation is going to have to make a call. The fact that he makes it in front of a screen, is that any different from making it in real life?
Yeah, obviously it is, because you know, you're getting another look at it. There's question marks whether it can be slowed down or not, and I think that's
sort of where I was going to with this, is that it's the referee being able to see it and make a human decision that is based on intuition and interpretation. If that's what the law requires you to do, and that's what the briefings that the referees are given require them to do, then that's what they have to do. But if you then slow it down, suddenly if you're talking about things like unnatural movement, that everything looks unnatural when it's slowed down.
The problem that's going to occur, and I think it's going to create huge problems in the Premier League when it comes in, is that everybody is going to be looking at VAR with a magnifying glass. And we're going to find situations like we saw last night within the Champions League with United, where a referee is going to give a decision, a manager at the end of the game is going to question, why have you given that? Why have you given that? Explain to me why you've given it. They don't have to explain. The next week, a very similar situation happens again. The referee goes and looks at VAR and says, similar situation, it's not a penalty. So VAR is supposed to help us in terms of getting the right decisions. It's going to create more inconsistency, because what you're doing now, instead of having referee, 2 linesmen to help out, you're now throwing extra people into the mix that's only going to confuse the matter even more, because at the end of the day, all it is, it's an opinion. So if...
In the situation last night, there was a screen at the side of the pitch. VAR said, you should probably go and have a look at this. I'm paraphrasing. You should probably go and have a look at this. The referee says, all right, goes over, has a look at the decision and makes his own mind up. So it's only him. All he's been done is
but how much has he even been influenced in that instant? He may have called for a corner. Someone in Switzerland, who's not even there, I don't know where they are, is saying...
They're in a truck or a room, watching, in their kit. Well,
they're not sat there live. They're not sat there live.
But can that not be a benefit?
I mean, look, the reality is the fact that the official was being prompted to go and review something, of course, it's then left at the behest of the official in that moment. But naturally, they're going to be influenced to some extent of, well, why has somebody brought that to my attention? It must be a significant moment. He's then having to take time to apply his interpretation of the law of the game, and which he did. And for that reason, it's the correct decision. The problem with that is nobody in their right mind thinks that interpretation of the law of the game is the right one for the game, because we're not considering that players are not... They're doing things in a most unnatural manner, and that until we simplify it to a point that's reasonable around what footballers naturally do, then I think we're going to be talking about this for a long time to come.
I think the confusion that's been created as well is that I've listened to a few referees' interviews today and referees that have officiated in the Premier League. I've heard referees say it was a penalty, and I've heard referees say it wasn't a penalty. Now, this is qualified referees who have refereed at the highest level, and they can't agree. So all of a sudden, you now... The issue that could be as well, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if you've got a referee that sees his reputation being fantastic, being unbelievable for getting the right decisions, if he believes that he's made a decision and VAR call him over, he'll probably just turn around and go, not interested. Not interested. I made the decision, I'm standing by it. It's just going to create... It's going to end up, in my opinion, I've said it, it's not something that I'm jumping on a bandwagon at. I've said it for years since I saw it in the Confederations Cup. I think it's an absolute
Well, especially
farce.
when its whole reason for existence was to simplify it and
just
reduce
complicated it.
elements of doubt. All we have done is open a major can of worms.